One second. Okay, now, sorry, you can continue.
We welcome all those of you that are here on the Zoom webinar as you're coming in, and those of you that are watching on YouTube Live, and those of you that are going to be listening to the recording. So today was Yud Zayin Cheshvan, hence weathering the storm. And we want to talk about this idea of how do we weather this storm? We know that Hashem said, Tanayach Bayel HaTeva, come to the Teva, which means the words of Torah and Tefillah. But on a practical level, what does that look like? So the structure of the week tonight is going to work is that we're first going to hear a short presentation by Rabbi Friedman, followed by a short presentation by Rabbi Schonbuch, followed by all the questions that you submitted. I have them, and you can also ask questions in the Q&A, which I could then pose to either the rabbi or the therapist. And many of you sent in questions that were specific either to the rabbi or the therapist or both. And together, we're looking to really see how can we overcome internal challenges, external challenges, how can we raise ourselves, and how could we, put ourselves in the best emotional and mental space so that we could also help our children overcome their challenges. So on that note, it's an honor to introduce Rabbi Manis Friedman, who's a world-renowned author and counselor. He shares practical wisdom on spirituality, relationships, everything. The #1 most popular rabbi on YouTube, with really thousands of followers. And also I had the big zchus to write some children's books together with Rabbi Friedman. So it's really excited to hear from you. And thank you for coming on to this Branches event for Bais Rivkah mothers and anyone else who's on.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the first thing we need to say is these conversations, these questions and answers, can be very discouraging because you're going to hear ideas you never thought of it before, which means you're not a good mother, you're not a good father, you're not a good mechanech. It can work against you. I think the safest thing would be just raise your children the way you think you should, and don't ask questions and don't read books and don't consult with the experts, because it takes away all your confidence. And without your confidence, nothing works. So this should not discourage anybody. If it gives you some good ideas and helpful ideas, that's great. Otherwise, you're the mother, you're the boss, you're the father, the only father to these children. Do what you do, and the Eibishter will help. Don't get paranoid about this.
I thought you were going to close down the Zoom right away. Okay, so we're still staying on, but just that we shouldn't take it too much, not use it in a way where we use it against ourselves, but only in a way that could be helpful.
Right. It should not be discouraging. And the same with marriage counseling. You write a book on how to make a solid marriage, and all of a sudden everybody's getting divorced. Because, he doesn't do that, or she doesn't do that, so. And then if you have very smart kids, and they read the books you have in the house on how to raise children, and they recognize immediately that what you're saying comes from page 9 of chapter 2, it kind of destroys the whole. So no discouraging. A mother who is busy mothering her children cannot go wrong. And a father who is busy being a father, that's all that's asked of you. No regrets. The only regret is that you weren't a father or you weren't a mother. But if you're listening to these conversations, obviously you are. And you want to be better. So if it helps you be better, fine. And if not, ignore everything and just do what you do. Raise your children the way you were raised, and good luck. But I do want to say one positive thing. I had a granddaughter who didn't do very well in schools. Very smart girl, but the schools were just... But she went to a school in Eretz Yisrael, Mayonot, and for the first time in her life, she loved learning. And I asked her, why is this different? She said, because every teacher there really knows his subject. The point of this conversation is that sometimes we worry a little too much about our methodology, our emotional state, the children's emotional state. We get a little too carried away with that. If you know what you're saying, and what you're saying is smart, what else do you have to worry about? Give good information, give good chinuch, tell children what is right and what is wrong, but do it in a way that the child knows that you know what you're talking about. And then all these psychological issues won't even come up. But all we want is health, mental health for our children. We make them crazy. So again, no worries. Your children are fine. They need to learn. Well, of course they need to learn. Everybody needs to learn. And when they find out right from wrong, when they find out what is acceptable versus unacceptable, beautiful versus ugly, when they know what they're doing, they'll be fine. It's confusion or uncertainty that makes people crazy. That's the rabbinic take. Let's hear what the experts have to say.
So I'll just introduce Rabbi Schonbuch, who's a psychotherapist who specializes in individual, couple, and family therapy. He also is the director of My Talk Place, and he recently released a book, which I hope you touch on, which is called Viktor Frankl and the Psychology of the Soul, which really fuses the Chassidus of the Mitzvah Rebbe and really kind of helps with this ask the rabbi, ask the therapist thing. We'd love to hear from you as a therapist, how we could weather the storms of life.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, to address Rabbi Friedman's comments, I hope not to make you crazy tonight, and I hope to give you some good information. So let me share with you some of my clinical information. I'll let the rabbi direct the spiritual information as best as we can tonight. Let me share a few slides. This is my classic style when I teach. I often share visually as well. So tonight's topic is, weathering the storm. And it's such a tremendous topic because there's a lot of storms that are coming, a lot of storms that we've been through already the last few years. Just think the last 4 years, what we've been through. When we're ready to deal with one thing, it goes away, and then suddenly there's another thing coming. So there's a storm going on, right? It's part of Gullus. But I want to give you some advice that ultimately, in order to ride the storm, we have to be anchored. There has to be an anchoring. And there's two conceptual places to anchor. I would say from above and from below. Let's take a look at what that means. Be like a tree. Its roots in the ground and its roots in the heavens. So the two most rewarding theories that I work from as a psychologist, and I offer things which I believe work for people that are grounded, that are helpful. The two most important things to help our children weather the storm and to help ourselves are, one, I would say, is attachment, providing healthy attachment with our children. Rabbi Friedman was alluding to that before. And two is sharing with them meaning. I'd say the first one's from below and the second one's from above. And the two psychologists that I follow, which I believe are kosher and safe for our community and helpful. One talks about something called attachment theory, and the other wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. The first, his name is John Bowlby, great British psychiatrist and researcher. He's the father of attachment theory. Then, of course, is Viktor Frankl. Now, let's talk about attachment. How do we do it? What is it? How do you create that with your children? Well, according to Bowlby, what we need to create for our children through attachment is what he calls a secure base and a safe haven. What does that mean? Secure base is, I'm here for you, and I'm always going to be here for you. And also, when you're in danger, you know who to turn to. So that's what we can create as parents with our children. And he said that when we do that right, what we do is we create a lasting psychological connectedness with our children. And it impacts on them later in life. It affects their relationships and their sense of security. That's in order to weather the storm. Now, the second great theory I work from is the theories of logotherapy, Viktor Frankl's psychology, which is the psychology of meaning. Here are the two main principles. Life has meaning under all circumstances, even the most miserable ones, and our main motivation for living is our will to find meaning in life. We want to help people find meaning. Now, this is different than most psychology because the world of psychology, for at least 120 years or so, has been focusing on the self, towards the left, towards our drives, our cognitions, our experiences, and our traumas. But according to Frankl, we want to shift people from our past into our future, to the world of spirituality. We want to focus with our children on values, on fulfilling goals, on finding meaning, getting closer to Kadosh Baruch Hu, and on Emunah. That's the psychology of Viktor Frankl. There's two books I wrote about this. One I wrote 20 years ago called At Risk, Never Beyond Reach, about helping teenagers at risk weather the storm. And two is Viktor Frankl and the psychology of the soul, helping people find meaning. In my first book, I talked about something called relationship theory. And it goes as follows with this formula, I equals QR. So if you want impact on your children, you have to develop a quality relationship with them. So the more quality of the relationship you have, the more impact you can have with them. Think of it as an emotional savings account. The more I put into them, the more I can take out when necessary. The more I put in for a rainy day, the more I can take out. We have to work on the relationship. There's three ways to do that. We have to develop a healthy connection with them, spending time with them. We need to learn how to communicate effectively with them. And thirdly, we need to reduce our control and move in this modern era from what I call control to influencing them through the positive relationship we develop with our children. And in my new book, and I'll conclude on these last two slides, the way I look at good therapy and finding meaning for people is unlike most psychologies, which focus on things at the bottom of the chart, like behaviors, emotions, thoughts, thinking patterns, beliefs, identity, and so on. We need to also help our children go beyond themselves to find meaning, values, spirituality, and develop a relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And sometimes that is what they ultimately need to feel better, to do better in life. And if we can do those two things well, both help them find a sense of security with us emotionally, and we help them find meaning in their lives, then we can help them weather the storm most effectively.
Thank you. So I want to just say that, first of all, those of you that are on the webinar, if as anything comes up, you can write a Q&A. No one else sees it, only the panelists. And if a question is addressed to Rabbi Friedman or Rabbi Schonbuch, you want to pipe in, or the opposite, then go ahead. But I want to start with a general question addressed to Rabbi Friedman. To what extent is our mental health within our control? And how much is influenced by external factors that are out of our control? In other words, when we're talking about mental health, how much could we really do on our own?
Well, if you're calling it mental health, how much control do you have over pneumonia? Yeah, you can avoid walking in the streets when it's cold and, with wet feet. So you can do certain things to avoid. But basically, if you have pneumonia, you go to a doctor. You find the right medicine. I guess the same would be true if you have an emotional illness. Excuse me. The question is, what's an emotional illness? If I'm frightened, if I'm upset, is that an emotional illness? If I'm confused, if I don't know, I can't tell what's proper behavior and not, is that a mental illness? So we got to be a little more specific in our use of the words. We have emotional challenges. We have mental challenges. So I'm sure the doctor will agree, not every experience is a trauma. And not everything traumatizes you. You had a fright. Okay, so you were scared. Doesn't mean you're traumatized. You had a disappointment. It doesn't mean you're depressed. So what we need to really be clear, careful about, everybody today has become an amateur psychiatrist. And we're constantly analyzing our children, ourselves, each other, and we're making a mess. If you really think it's a psychological problem, then ask an expert and don't patchke. So how much control do we have over illness? Not very much, except to go to a good doctor. But not everything we suffer from is an illness. What says the doctor?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Rabbi Schonbuch, you want to add something?
Well, I agree with you. I would say that there's no business like trauma business, and it's become quite the industry. But there are people that do suffer from real trauma, and we can differentiate based upon their symptoms. I mean, everybody gets a little depressed, right? And everybody feels a little anxious. But the question is it clinically important to treat? So there are times where things are more serious, I would say. Like when there's suicidal ideation, that's of course a serious topic to get help for. Um, when somebody can't get out of bed or is scared to leave the house, it's a more serious problem. But then there's the whole world of most of us in between. And there's where I think, for example, Viktor Frankl is helpful, finding meaning. What am I going to do with my life? Who am I going to help right now? What meaning can I fulfill right now? How can I deepen my emunah? I think there's a big world in between that we need to focus on. With our children, that will really help them. And if they're really in trouble, we'll kind of know it, as Rabbi Friedman says. Then we can get the real intervention they need.
So are you saying that meaning and everything is outside of the clinician's area? Or are you saying that even within a clinician, that meaning will be helpful?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Well, if you go to the right clinician, he or she will point you in the right direction. My concern is that psychotherapy doesn't necessarily point you in the right direction unless it's rooted in something beyond the self. So a good psychotherapist understands. I mean, Frankl talks about this. He wrote another book called The Unconscious God, a less known book. And I suggest people read it because he talks about this unknown God within that needs to be experienced, that's longing to be experienced in life. So a good therapist will detect that. We don't tell people what to do. We can detect spirituality. But I know for sure as a therapist, when I find real spirituality, it's really helpful. I mean, just think about this. We're seeing our clients 45 to 50 minutes a week. How helpful can that be? What we need to do is help them find spiritual habits that they live with on a daily level. So therapeutically, even I would suggest chovos halevavos. It's a good thing because it helps. So therapists should be trained in chovos halevavos. I'm not the only one saying this. There's a fellow named Dr. David Ross-Marin at Harvard that has something called SIT. I've written about it in my books and articles you might have seen. He calls it spiritually informed therapy. In his therapy, they took two types of therapies. They took progressive muscle relaxation for anxiety, where you squeeze up and relax different parts of your body. They took the same group of people that had anxiety and studied chovos halevavos with them at Harvard for a week or two. Stories of emunah. And what they found scientifically, and I wrote about this in my previous book, Think It'll Be Good. What they found scientifically is there are better outcomes than those that spend 2 weeks learning chovos halevavos and emunah in the long term. So there's a lot to be gleaned from our spirituality. Now we just need to apply it in psychological terms in a psychological framework, because the data is coming out that it really is effective.
Are children capable of this? Like when our children are going through emotional challenges like anxiety or any of these things, are children able to use their mind and have chovos halevavos influence them?
From their perspective, of course.
So is it our job to bring it down to them?
Maybe they have to bring it up to us. Maybe they know more than us, actually. Maybe they're more innocent. I think they probably experience a lot of deep spirituality far beyond adults. We just got to tap into that at their level. But yes, I would say it's a good place to start when they're younger.
Okay.
Meaning in life is not therapeutic. Meaning in life is the meaning of life. If you're suffering, maybe it's because you haven't found the meaning of life. But finding meaning is not a therapeutic gimmick. Yeah. It's life.
Okay, so to bring this down to specific challenges, one woman wrote, how can I raise my children to be happy and confident when finances are very tight and they feel deprived? Both of you, take a shot.
I guess this touches on the subject of self-esteem.
Okay.
Being poor gives you a poor self-esteem. Well, here's a perfect example of where a person is missing the awareness of the meaning of life. In the meaning of life, poverty is not an embarrassment. You find meaning in it. And even self-image has to have a meaning, otherwise it's useless or toxic. So I think the one thing that Frankl doesn't do is tell you the meaning of life. Any meaning is better than no meaning, right? So you got to go and find your meaning in life. But there is the meaning. And I think we're a little behind on that one.
Can you shed some insight on that?
It's like this doctor said many, many years ago, a healer. He said, a healthy person is someone whose body does not disturb the mind or prevent it from seeking the purpose for which we exist. And everybody in the audience was like, wow, like that's it, that covers everything. But one person walked over to him and said, excuse me, what is the reason for which we exist? He says, I'm a doctor, not a clergyman. So you ask your clergyman, what is the meaning of life? And you don't always get a good answer. To get out of Gehenna, to get into Gan Eden, that's the purpose of life, the meaning of life. That doesn't fly. So no, we have to know the purpose. And when you're educating children, that's the first thing you want to convey to them, that not find a purpose. Find the purpose. That's much stronger, much more reliable. And then poverty wouldn't be an issue. Self-image wouldn't be an issue.
But there's human emotions. You might know here the purpose, but then here you might still struggle.
Children don't do that. Generally, what you tell a child is what you make out of the child. And an adult already has issues, agendas. You can tell him one thing, he has his own opinion, he doesn't agree, and whatever. But giving children the purpose in life is so grounding and so empowering that many of the issues just don't happen. Now, of course, we're talking about healthy children. We're not talking about children traumatized by their parents and dysfunctional family dynamic. Then you go for therapy.
Rabbi Schonbuch, do you want to add to that?
I would agree with you. You know, you could meet people who aren't off as well financially, but they have wonderful attitudes. Their value system is so rooted in the Eibishter, is so rooted in their spirituality, And I don't believe their kids necessarily suffer as much because of that. They have a value that they live for. That's what Viktor Frankl said. If you have a why, a WHY, you can accomplish any how. That's what we're referring to. So from a psychologist perspective, you want to help a person find out more about their meaning in their life, and they can overcome any how, so to speak. And of course, you need to listen to your children too, and they express things to you through, validation and reflection. Because somebody is suffering with less money, sometimes is suffering from an inescapable problem. And then that's where Frankl says, if you can't change the situation, you have to change your attitude towards the situation. And that goes beyond finances. That goes to the root of trauma as well. I mean, we cannot change trauma because it happened already. There's nothing we can do about it. We can change our attitude towards life. That's how we start changing our relationship with trauma. It only can be done here, right now. It can't be done very much in the past. So whether it's poverty, look what's going on in Eretz Yisrael. I'm sure our children are very bothered. And we can't protect them from these things, can we, in the storm? We thought we could protect our kids years ago. We keep them off their phones. Even if you have the best filters in the world from Borough Park, they can still see the stuff on their friend's phone. They're going to see it somewhere. There's no secrets anymore. Let's be honest about it. So really, it's giving them, really deepening their awareness of who they are and what their purpose is. And those children tend to do much better in the long term.
So a couple questions came in on this topic. For example, but we're talking about the mother's mental health as well as her children. So it's both. So one woman says, what if it affects my own, the stress affects me, the bills, my anxiety, my mood, is just my energy is affecting my children. And you could really replace poverty with any challenge that's going on in the house. What if the mother feels so overwhelmed and it's just being transmitted to the child?
That's always the case. Children are never worried about the mortgage unless they see their father suffering or hear it from the father. But it just reminded me of a story. I was at a Shabbaton, and we're sitting by the table Shabbos afternoon, and this 6-year-old boy comes running to his father, hysterical. His brother took away something, and he pushed him, and the father just very casually turns to his son and says, so was that good or bad? And the kid all of a sudden becomes philosophical and says, oh, okay, bye. Not everything is a trauma. Stop and think. So what happens is a good thing, a bad thing, it's a terrible thing, it's a dangerous thing. What are you complaining about? The kid stops to think for a second, and no big deal, and he goes back to playing. I'm sure that was not the first time he did that with these children. He does that with all of them. So it was a very interesting observation. But if the parents are suffering from anxieties, then obviously they have to solve their problem, not try to keep it from the children, which is probably impossible.
Another mother wrote, if you could practically explain, how do you give over the meaning of life, which is what we're talking about, to your child? How do you do that?
You don't necessarily word it that way. Let me tell you the meaning of life. You just live the meaning of life. You make a bracha on the cookie because Hashem is waiting to hear a bracha. You don't do that because Hashem doesn't like when you do that. That is the meaning of life. Avodas Hashem. That is a very useful measure, yardstick, for knowing whether I'm doing good or doing bad. It's just sanity. It's literally a synonym for sanity. Not a special project.
It's not a project. It's just how you live. So
Let me also suggest on that point. I mean, our life as Lubavitchers is filled with meaning. I think it's the highest form of meaning in the world is in terms of human behaviors. From Modeh Ani to the Bais Psukim, to from child to, it's remarkably replete with meaning. So I would say that we're already doing that pretty well. But what I would say is you have to know when to modulate into the attachment sometimes. And I know that from trauma therapy, is that sometimes what's being experienced consciously is not what's happening on a nervous system level, for example. Meaning that people with trauma often need their body-focused regulation before they go on to the therapy. Let me just use that as an example for a second, like breathing, relaxing, like wiggling your toes now to ground yourself in the floor. It'd be like a nice grounding exercise. We're doing some tapping, get into your body, very powerful trauma-informed type of therapy. However, what people need is safe attachment with their family members as well. So you don't have to be the greatest philosopher in the world to outsmart your kids. You have to just be there for them in a certain soothing way. That's the attachment that Bowlby's hinting to, but we know from somatic experiencing, it's the warmth, it's the calmness, it's the affection. That builds that deep sense of security internally. What bubbles up from that is meaning as well, because they feel secure now. So you don't have to outsmart them, you just have to be there for them sometimes. So modulate between the meaning mode and the attack. If you find a dead end over here, you go the other direction. But they're not dead ends, they're both pathways. You got to work on them almost back and forth or simultaneously at times.
Okay, somebody said that sounds good when you're talking about little kids, but mothers in Bais Rivkah range from preschool through high school and seminary. What about their teens? And they're outspokenly resentful about a situation that they're in, or things are really hard. You can't just tell them, oh, it's all good. How do you handle that then?
Doctor?
Rabbi, listen, teenagers, what do you do with teenagers? Let's talk about teenagers. Can we talk about teenagers for a minute? How do you deal with teenagers? You have to hang out with your kids if you want them to be healthy. That's the key. So hanging out means you have to know what's happening in their internal world. You have to hang out in their internal world. Sometimes it's going to be their music. It might be their sports. It might be current events. It might be the impact social media is having on their lives. It might be bullying, whatever they're going through. You have to be there with them. You have to hang out with people. There's a concept in theory called coactive coaching. I teach this in my classes. What is coactive coaching? So in therapy, we talk about an old model of Freud, for example, like the all-knowing psychotherapist taking care of the ill patient. But in modern terms, it's all over with. We only exist with people, not on top of people, therapeutically. It's called coactive. So we build with the client what they want to talk about. We together, we build with them a reality together. The same is true with parenting teenagers. You have to be there with them. You don't have to do much more than that. When you're there with them, they feel a security. You're able to now, and what you can also do is when they feel good, because you're connected with them, they have all this wealth of spirituality growing up in our schools. You can segue into that at times. You can highlight that. You can detect those spiritual, emotional resources when you're with them, but you got to be there with them. So that's what I find is that you have to invest in your connection with them. That's where they start feeling better. And then they feel better, then they're more open to talk about meaningful things and talk about difficult things. Like, we don't have answers for everything. Parents don't have to feel, Rabbi Friedman said that before, we don't have to feel we have to answer every question. That's up to the Eibishter sometimes. We don't really know why things happen to us. And teenagers can hear that message as well.
Somebody asked, you said we already do a lot of the meaning, built in as Lubavitcher. So then why do we have so many issues with self-esteem, with everything?
We don't appreciate the power of the meaning. So whenever we see an issue, we think we have to run to a doctor. We have to give a little more confidence and a little more prominence to the meaning, because it is really it's not a cure. It's just a healthy way to live, so that you don't need a cure unless something terrible happens in your life. And for the average kid, I don't know if something terrible happens in their life. And when something really terrible happens, they're much better off. You know how people survive a real tragedy a lot better than an imagined tragedy? Like an orphan. Orphans don't need as much therapy as people in a dysfunctional family.
That's not imagined.
Well, the things we call trauma that aren't really traumas and that kind of stuff. Because how can you cure someone who isn't really sick? Or isn't really broken, you know? But you know what you were saying, Rabbi Schonbuch, I heard this story recently. Mendel Futterfass said to his doctor, the quote from the Gemara, Tov shebereifim legehenim, which we understand to mean that even the best doctor is destined to go to Gehenna. And it's kind of enigmatic, like what? What does that mean? So when he said it to his doctor, the doctor said, excuse me, you want me to heal you or not? Why are you discouraging me? He said, no, you don't understand what it means. Tov shebereifim, the best doctors, legehenim, will come with you into your Gehenna. A regular doctor stands away, stands apart from your Gehenna. But the best doctors, Gehenna, they get into your Gehenna. They feel your pain. They see your grief and so on. So yeah, you have to connect. You have to connect not because that heals. You have to connect because then when you tell them something, they'll listen. If you're not connected, they're not listening.
%. 100%. We connect when we feel listened to. One person once said, the greatest pleasure in life is to be understood. Carl Rogers, the famous psychotherapist, said that when you listen to somebody deeply, they become part of the human race again. So when people are listened to, they feel connected with, then they're open to grow. So you have to root yourself in that attachment with them primarily. And what Rabbi Friedman's saying, and I think he's saying, that's what I'm saying also, is once you do that, things kind of just happen anyway. So you focus, you modulate between attachment and meaning, and attachment and meaning with people.
Is that like the idea of Yesod, which means bonding, and which Yesod is also mashpia, and that's how you are able to have hashpah?
Yesod is, yeah.
Okay, so
No,
did you want to say something else? What?
People who came to see the Rebbe by dollars, and they walk away so excited. He saw me. Saw right through me. But he saw me. Nobody else ever did. But it is a great pleasure to be seen, or even better, to be heard.
And to be understood. And sometimes I'll explain to parents, when you validate your children's feelings, this is very key. It doesn't mean you agree with them. Keep that in mind. And that's okay. But you need to take the first step to validate. And then they're going to start growing after that validation because they feel heard. Once you're heard by somebody, you want to connect with what they're connected to. And if you're connected to the Eibishter and you heard them, you're connected with the Eibishter as well. The process.
2 questions came in that are very similar, having to do with teenage girls. One of them is, how can I help my 13-year-old daughter who struggles with anxiety, worry, anger, and avoids making or interacting with friends? Okay, you know what? I actually read the wrong question, so let's do this one. The 2 that I thought were connected, I didn't read. Let's do this one, and then we'll go to the 2 that are connected. Hashgacha pratis, that came out. I have a daughter who's struggling with a lot of these things, and it also spills out into socially. She avoids making or interacting with friends. And this is addressed to Rabbi Schonbuch.
Okay, I would say 2 things. Number 1, if we're talking about significant anxiety, then from my perspective, one of the best things you help people with is something called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. When you help a person work through different levels of their thoughts and their belief systems about themselves. I'm speaking very practically right now. So when a client comes in, I first listen to their behaviors. What are they doing? And their sensations, they're running around, not sitting still, and their heart is racing. Okay. But that comes from their emotions. So when you want to help somebody, this is my perspective, you have to go up this pyramid with them. You hear what they're presenting, and you want to hear what the emotions are behind their words. Emotions come from the Latin word emovere, which means to move someone. So if you want to move your children, you have to listen to and validate their emotions. They said, I had a hard time in school today. I feel really sad. So if you want to deepen, you go, you're really feeling sad. Tell me more about that, right? It's a validation. So you're getting deeper to the person's core. Where do emotions come from? They come from your thoughts, what your kids are thinking about. What are their thoughts? Where do thoughts? So think about this. You go into Baba Machteris, right? You got whatever it is. So you think you hear it, you're going to sleep. It's 1 a.m. in Crown Heights. You hear some scratching at the window. And you think, right? It's not so far-fetched. And you think it's a robber. How do you feel? And what do? Your heart races. You call the police. You scream. But then you realize it's just some leaves that are blowing on the window. Ugh, it's not so bad, right? So what I think about, this is Chabad. I mean, CBT in a funny way, it's also by the guy, all the psychologists were Jewish, basically. But Aaron Beck structured this for us. He says, if you think differently, you feel differently. Chabad chagas nahi. That's why I like CBT. It's also very kosher from my perspective. Where do your thoughts come from? They come from things called thinking patterns. Here are some of the key thinking patterns. Black and white thinking, overgeneralizing, mind reading, thinking you know what people are thinking about you, labeling yourself, I'm bad, they're good, negative filtering. You take 4 tests, you do okay on 3, you fail 1, you only focus on the negative, you only focus on the 4th one. That's called negative thinking. Where do thinking patterns come from? They come from our belief systems. There are 3 core negative beliefs in CBT. You could have all 3, by the way, is worthless, helpless, or unlovable. So when I listen to my clients speak, and I'm suggesting parents do this when you're listening, listen for thinking patterns. You have to read a bit how to do that. Listen to belief systems. Okay. Now, here's the key. So somebody that comes to me, a young woman, young teenager, has thoughts about herself. They're probably negative thinking patterns. People are thinking about her. They're probably black and white thinking. I'm either good or bad, either accepted. I'm in the group, I'm out of the group, right? Black and white thinking. Probably in that realm. So just a little CBT, when you talk to somebody and help them manage their thoughts, you examine them with them, they often open up and say, oh, that's a bit of black and white thinking, probably best to do something else with my thoughts. So I do recommend for some young women or anybody that has anxiety, I like CBT. It's just a good, solid, kosher way to help people think about their thoughts more effectively. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And what about the social bit? If a girl's not making or interacting with friends, how could a mother help?
Well, sometimes I go very spiritual with people. I get to their highest resources, but I go very practical. Sometimes a young person or anybody doesn't know how to make friends. So you want to examine, well, how have you tried to make friends? What are they saying things which bother you? Or are you perhaps overreacting? You have to look in to see if you can help them find ways, more creative ways to relate to people. And maybe they don't know how. I mean, people that come to me sometimes, I find out that they're depressed. Why are they depressed? Because I have no friends. Why do you have no friends? Because I'm too scared to call. I have a phone anxiety. Do you know what I do? I help them pick up a phone and call people. I found that the behavioral problem is this fear of phoning somebody. That's why they're depressed. But you didn't know that when you started, right? So for a young person, you want to find out, so what exactly is making you feel that you're socially not accepted or anxious? What's going on? Are there ways that maybe from your own experience as a parent, you could share with them? Here's what I found was the way that I could get more friends or, be more accepted or maybe not care about things that are not so important. Do you understand? So it's important to help them on those really key levels as well, practical levels.
Right. So now the 2 questions that were similar. unless Hashem decides something else should come out of my mouth. How could I help my high schooler develop confidence and self-worth so she stops relying on outside validation? For example, constantly needing others to praise her baking or approve her style choices. And that's connected to how could I help my child handle peer pressure? And she wants to wear maybe less sneeze or branded outfits just to be able to fit in and accepted and approved by cooler girls. Both, addressed to both.
I think the first thing is to find out whether she really has that problem. Sometimes parents diagnose their children and they're completely not correct. So again, it's so dangerous to be an amateur psychiatrist or psychologist. What's the truth? A girl comes and says, my friends accuse me, my friends think I'm this, that, and the other. And what do you think? No, I'm the other, this and that. I said, okay, so now we have two opinions. What's the truth? It diffuses, or at least it takes the edge off the anxiety or the emergency. So what's the truth? Usually something in between. My friends think I'm the biggest liar in the world. I'm not. I'm a mediocre liar. Not the best liar in the world. So I don't know if this is a direct answer to the question, but it sounds like the mother has lost her sense of humor. And of course, the kid had never got a sense of humor. They can't laugh at themselves. It's terrible.
The mother should laugh that her daughter, let's say, wants to fit in and get the trend of the boot, of the this, of the that.
Not about her problem, about life. Things happen, they're funny, they're crazy, they're absurd. Don't take everything so seriously.
The bottom line is your daughter wants something, it's against your standard, but she wants to fit in. How do you help her?
Why? Why does she fit in? Why
Because
is
she wants to be cool and socially accepted. She's a teenage girl.
You know how to be cool? Relax. Everybody will love you. The harder you try, the more unpopular you become. The coolest thing is the person who doesn't care.
So how do you help your child not care? How do you help your child be comfortable in their own skin?
Well, maybe it was you who made her anxious in the first place. Maybe you worried about her being popular, so she got the message. So now she worries, and every little gesture is taken as a rejection, and now she's miserable.
So I have to just basically be comfortable in my own skin so that my kids could be comfortable in their own skin.
Comfortable in your own skin is the definition of sanity. Yeah, if you're comfortable in your own skin, you wouldn't have any of these problems. And you would know the purpose of life. So that's why I'm saying, let's not get bent out of shape over everything we hear. You know, you become a hypochondriac. Oh, yeah, I did that wrong. Oh, yeah, I have that problem too. Yeah, and my kids are the worst at that. That's not what we're here for tonight. We're here to lighten up. Mashiach is coming. That should help. Because how much longer do you think this problem is going to exist? Another day? 2 days? 4 days? Lighten up.
Rabbi Schonbuch.
Well, I'm going to broaden that discussion. I mean, if I understand the question correctly, your daughter wants something that you don't want her to have or to be a certain way, and it conflicts with your values. My answer is as follows. Remember I talked about the 3 C's, communication, right? Connection and control. They're very interconnected. But sometimes you have to work more on the connection and the communication. Now, when it comes to control, you have to be careful. This is the way I understand it with kids. is that you do have real control between 0 and 6, 7, 8. At a certain point, 9, 10, 11, progressively you lose control of your kids. You don't really control them. And they'll do what they want behind your back anyway. You don't really control them. You have to move from direct control, what I call influence. You have to be influential. To be influential, you have to have a relationship with them. But don't get too bogged down in those other things. Build the relationship. Keep on building it. If you're in trouble with your kids, you're not going to be able to win the fight with them. You have to build a relationship with them. That's going to help them. You got to be the soil that they can grow from. That's really, really important. That's how to get them. You got to be careful with that. Now, by the way, I do mentioned my book 20 years ago, and I do this for people. I actually just spoke at a Hindi Press runs a mentoring program. I just spoke at one of her trainings yesterday of her mentors. And I was thinking, what an incredible thing to be a mentor today. The Rebbe understood the importance of, Rabbi Friedman could tell me more. The Rebbe spoke many years ago about having a mashpia, correct? What an incredible thing. I talk about, when I teach mentors how to do this well, there's 3 places your kids live in. Well, they live in 2 places. Let's start. They live in a school. They go to school during the day. They're in school more than they're at home. And the second place they live is in home. They come back and forth, right? What if a kid doesn't do well in school? Let's talk reality right now. Kids have learning disabilities, right? Maybe 30% of kids don't learn well, have trouble Aleph Bais, have trouble in math. 30%, a lot of kids. So what happens is they don't feel good about themselves, right? And they don't do well in school. It's like dominoes falling. And if a kid doesn't feel well and doesn't do well in school, they start acting out. They get in trouble. They get home. They get in trouble because the teacher sent them home. They got a note that they had to go home. And what happens when they get home? What do the kids feel like? How do the parents feel when the kid's not doing well? They don't feel good. Now your parent's not happy with you, and your teacher's not happy with you. You're stuck, right? So what I refer to in mentoring is I call it the third place. How do you influence people's lives? You have to bring them to a third place sometimes. The mentor, a good mentor, is a great third place. Because the mentor is not the school, and the mentor is not the parent. It's somebody that hangs out with them, has a good time with them. And I believe you take a healthy 20-year-old, a firm, healthy 20-year-old, and spend once a week for an hour with a girl in 7th grade for 20 weeks, you'll make an indelible mark on their lives because you've taught them about attachment and you make them feel important and they don't feel controlled and they'll look up that healthy, firm teenager. So that's in a long-winded way I'm going to answer your question. Sometimes parents can't change their children. Most of us probably can't, right? And when we can't, we're best off to find a good mentor, a healthier person, like a healthy person, a few stages ahead, 7th grader with a seminary girl, all along the way. With my children personally over the years, some have gone to yeshivas abroad, some have been, especially when they're abroad, I always try to find, I ask the Rosh Hashiva, I say, who's a good mentor? Who's a good mentor for my son? I'll pay them $20 a week, $40 a week, because now I have my eyes and ears in the school. And now I want that older young adult, let's say, to just hang out with my kid. I don't want them to tutor them, get them ready for it. Just hang out, learn a sikha with them. Just hang out, have a good time. Go get a slice of pizza. I feel that if we can't have indirect control, we can influence them by, one, having a good time with them, talking, experiencing life with them. I'll give you an example, if I may. He'll tell me when to stop. But I once had a family that came to me with a kid that was really at risk. He was beating up the sisters and beating this one up. He was miserable. And the parents would be fighting with that kid every day. And the more they fought with the kid, the more he fought back. I said, you know what? I asked the parents, how much time, individual time, do you give to each of your kids in the house? They had 7 kids, Karen, at the time. How much time, let me ask the parents here, just think about this. Okay, how much individual time does each of your children get each week? An hour, 3 hours, half an hour, 10 minutes, 5 minutes. People will find they may give each kid in their house, if they're lucky, 5 minutes of individual time. So what did I do? I suggested to that parent, you know what, instead of fighting your kid, go around the corner. I think it was Kol Tuv at the time. This was many years ago. Go get a drink. And I told them like this, most importantly, when you go out, don't talk about anything that you talked about in the house. Don't talk about school. Don't talk about beating up your sister. Just have a good time with them. Just air them out. Go get a drink, walk around the block for 20 minutes. And they did. And he came back and the kid started doing better because the kid needed attachment. So sometimes you got to read it better. You have to stop responding. You got to increase emotional impact by having a good time with them. That often get them out of the house, let them feel a little bit more important. They're lost in the crowd. Then they start doing better. So that's what I would suggest.
Wow, I love that. Okay, a mother wrote here, sometimes when my kids don't listen, I feel like I react with rage. It's not the mother I want to be, that I feel like it comes from how my parents reacted when I was younger. How can I change that? Addressed to both.
If you're really thinking about it and you're worried about it, that's a good sign. You don't want to react that way. You know you shouldn't react that way. If you really don't want to do it, eventually you'll stop. If you say, I don't want to, but I can't help it, then you need therapy. Because it's no longer a theory, it's an inability. So yes, if you understand, and you obviously do, your parents raised you with a lot of anger and frustration. You don't want to do that to your children, so don't. Yeah, but I can't help it. Well, can't help it? Then you need the therapy.
Right. So then what are some things okay, putting therapy aside, what are some tools or mindsets that could help? If it's not I can't, but that it's hard.
I think one good idea is to set aside certain times or certain places where there will be no anger and there will be no criticism. Not permanently and forever. Like, for example, I'm sitting by a table, dinner time with a family, and the kid came late or did something, and the father chastised him. And that felt so wrong for some reason. And I realized afterwards, I took the father aside and I said, sitting by the dinner table with the family must be the safest time of the day. Don't make sitting by the table dangerous for the kid. Never criticize a child sitting by a table, because then he won't want to come to the table.
But then when are you supposed to educate them?
It'll also ruin his appetite. So by a table, sacred time. I think Rabbi Schonbuch was kind of hinting at that. There are certain places you just don't do that, because everybody has to have a safe place. In the worst case, the safe place is the mashpia, because the mashpia never does that to you. Still there? Hello?
Yeah.
I lost the picture. Okay, so never criticize at the table. Never criticize on Shabbos. In other words, certain things you don't want to ruin for your children. So during those times, during those activities, never be critical or angry then. I think that's doable.
Well, I would agree with that 100%. At that Shabbos table, if you have younger children right now, stop fighting to have them be silent by Kiddush. It's the best advice I'd give you. Take it less seriously. You can ask and request. I'd use an iMessage. It would really be so nice for me if you could just, for a few minutes, just stand still as we sing along with Shalom Aleichem and when I make Kiddush. I'd really appreciate that. You could give them a little candy afterwards, depending upon the age. But Chas v'Shalom, you should be fighting about it. It's not going to work. You're already creating an enmity early on in life, which is not going to reverberate well in 20 years from now. They're not going to remember that as well as if you didn't react as much. I mean, they're going through their own pain. They've been sitting in school. You know, for those of us who are much older right now, remembering what it was like to sit in school for 7, 8, 9 hours a day. Our boys, for example, are sitting in school from 7 in the morning, 9 or 10 o'clock. And it's not easy to do. So you know what? This is what I discovered. I discovered that when they come home sometimes, this is what happens to parents. They say, my kid is so badly behaved in the house. I ask them, how are they doing in school? They're doing good. Oh, so say Baruch Hashem. because sometimes they need a place to let off some steam at your table. You can let it out. You can't let it get out of control. But we're not understanding their subjective reality. They just spent 13 hours in yeshiva, coming home, they're exhausted. Okay, they're not perfect. We demand perfection. We don't give them that place for them to feel okay in the long term. So it's very important to do that. Very important. But I want to answer that woman's question from before, because she got angry. Got angry and she realized she was triggered from her childhood. This is a serious problem. This is something you have to work on a little bit. Working on how to respond to emotional distress. Learning how to self-regulate in the face of difficult situations. We're all triggered by things we don't even know. They're all unconscious usually. The smallest things could trigger us, the biggest things won't trigger us, right? It's probably some association with being hurt in the past or whatever. But I do recommend that for this woman, there's something called somatic experiencing I like a lot. Learning how to deal with powerful sensations in your body. So sometimes when we have trauma or went through difficult times as children, we experience our reality very intensely. There's a great psychologist, therapist, her name is Pia Melody. She wrote a book called Facing Codependence. She talks about 5 symptoms of codependence. I'm not saying this woman's codependent. One of her symptoms is experiencing reality too intensely. I think Rabbi Friedman was referring to that before as well. But for some people, it's just so overwhelming. It's like an addiction. It's so powerful, they get triggered. So I like somatic experiencing because it teaches people how to regulate sensations in their body, you know. So the best thing when you're in rage and you're angry, the best thing is just to walk away for a few minutes, to not explode. If you can do that, it's probably better. But 2, to learn some grounding techniques. I love this one. Rabbi Friedman and I were at a conference a few weeks ago. We were at therapist was speaking, Gina Ross, very famous therapist, works with the frum community. She recommends 25 taps like this. Your breathing slows down, and count 10 objects in the room. Or if you're standing on the street, count 10 objects. So you work on a bit of that emotion regulation. You feel a bit better. Sometimes it's important to allow sensations to just dissipate by themselves without fighting them. So if that person was my client, I'd probably teach her to sit there with her sensations. And based upon the lecture's topic tonight, is weather the storm of her sensations. Because when we sit with sensations, we just watch them a bit from a distance, they tend to dissipate. So a little bit of emotion regulation, little technique, that would probably help that person be less triggered in the future.
Okay, somebody asked about how she could handle it when she thinks that her kids are teasing, hurting each other. She loses it when her kids are just, bullying each other. What could she do? Question is up for grabs.
We try to educate our kids on a need to do basis. We never talk to our children about being nice when they're being nice. We speak to them about it only when they're being bad. But when they're being bad, they're not listening. They're being defensive. So if you catch a kid misbehaving or teasing their sibling, and you start to lecture them about it, you're wasting your time. This is not chinuch, this is not educational, this is not helpful, this is not enlightening, it's just annoying, and they practice tuning you out until they become perfect at it. And then they tune you out even on other occasions. Never lecture when the kid is being defensive. You want your child to be nicer to the sibling, talk about it when everyone is relaxed, when no one has done anything wrong, without pointing fingers. You just talk about the issue. How cruel to hurt somebody's feelings. It's powerful. But when you're trying to discipline and educate at the same time, save your lecture. We should do that with ourselves also. We never try to be better when we're okay. We only try to be better when we mess up. But then we're too busy trying to repair the mess. So all the energy goes into the damage control, and we don't actually become any different. So that's called real chinuch. Chinuch means don't wait until the kid misbehaves. Think what the child needs to know and talk about it. And if you see the child doing something wrong, make believe you didn't see it and bring it up the next day when the kid comes home from school and everything is good and he's happy to be home. And you say, by the way, you know what you did yesterday?
Doesn't that ruin a good moment? Like when everything's going well, you don't want to bring up something from yesterday.
Yes, you do. Exactly. That's exactly when you want to do it. Because there's a compliment inherent. You've been thinking about me since yesterday? And there's the problem. If you don't discipline as a reaction, if you wait until tomorrow, by tomorrow you will have forgotten and you're in a good mood and you don't want to do it and you let it go. But if you really do it on the next day or even 2 days later, wow. This has got to be important. You've been thinking about this for 2 days? And then you say what you prepared to say. You don't just blurt out angry frustrations. So educate, don't just discipline. I think that's one of the reasons you need a mashpia, is because parents always are mashpia in the wrong time. When they're upset and frustrated. A mashpia is mashpia because that's his job.
So I'd like to share two things with you. It was just the last thing first, and then we'll go back to the original point. You see, I don't believe that the role of the parents is to discipline their children, especially the father. Father should not be involved in this. From my perspective, the role of the father is to share optimism with his family. That's all they need from you. They need optimism. Kids will work it out. But if you're optimistic, you pick them up. The father needs to walk in the house, high five. How can they help their wife? Right? And then just hang out with the kids, have a nice time and laugh with them. That's all they need to do. Discipline is out. It went out in the 60s. It's not coming back. Power to the people, right? It's not coming back anymore. It's the old school, as they call it, right? The new school is optimism. It's the only way out. That's what I'd say. In terms of what Rabbi Friedman was saying before, it's embodied in certain books I like to share with you. You know about the books. Just want to remind you to read them. So the first of these books is called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. Two Jewish therapists from the 80s, I believe. And they were basing the work on John Bowlby and attachment theory. And they basically said that more than you say is what you listen and how you listen to your children. So I highly suggest the easiest way for most parents to do this, especially when the kids are younger, is to get the book, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. It's all about reflection. It's a wonderful book. I'm sure most of you know it. It's right there. And it's a masterpiece. That's how I raise my kids, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen. It's about reflection, and they work things out. But to answer this woman's real question is, what about sibling rivalry? Well, it turns out these two wonderful therapists, Faber and Maslow, wrote a book on it, and that book is called Siblings Without Rivalry. And I suggest that she picks up the book because it's very helpful. But it does the same things that we've been both talking about tonight. It talks about the importance of spending individual time, listening to their feelings. Especially what Rabbi Friedman was saying is you don't react with anger at the moment. Then you teach them self-respect, you teach them discipline, healthy self-discipline, not disciplining them. You teach them emotion regulation, and afterwards you schmooze with them in a friendly way afterwards. That's what you want to do. And that's what the book teaches about.
Thank you. Okay, somebody wrote that I know technology isn't ideal for kids, but they beg for screen time every day. I'm drowning in life expectation, and so it's too hard for me to keep saying no. I also appreciate the break it gives me. How could I find a healthy balance? Therapist.
Therapist. Well, I love this topic because we're all involved with it, right? There's a wonderful book called Hooked, written by an Israeli MBA from Stanford or something. He talks about how technology addicts us to it. He was the guy that actually, near Ayal, he actually taught other businesses how to addict people. So they figured out there's 4 steps to addiction, and they make them basically into habits. So honestly, the most important thing, if you don't want your kids on technology, you have to get off the technology yourself. You can't be on your phone constantly in front of them. That's my first piece of advice. It's difficult. You have to spend more time and energy creating more meaningful activities. There's nothing as satisfying as taking a walk with a parent and just schmoozing. So you have to think about this proactively. How much time are you investing in the emotional relationship with your child? That's the only answer. We cannot fight technology. We can put filters on them, the best of our ability to protect them as long as possible, keep kids off the internet as long as possible. But they're all going to be exposed, unfortunately, even the best of situations, the best of parents, right? But ultimately, what we have to do is build the relationship with them and create meaningful activities. And we ourselves have to be off our phones with them. So I try to with my children. Most of my kids are older, but my younger kids, my wife, we try not to be on our phones. So we are now looking at them face panim el panim, having that relationship with them. That might mean playing more games with them. It might mean, playing a board game with them, doing something fun with them. We got to think about it. We're competing with stuff we can't compete against, but the best we can do is offer ourselves in a meaningful way with them. That will get them off a little bit more. I'm sorry. One more thing I would say that we forgot about the importance of playing an instrument, of doing artwork, of all types of creative activities. Our kids love them. They're much more rewarding than YouTube. So it's really important there's a cost to it, and there's a time limitation. But if you want to get your kids off the devices, you have to provide for them alternative activities. So we have in our community a whole bunch of, there's the jimmies and the tambourines and whatever's out there. There's new things I don't even know about. But those types of things are critical in creating meaningful and fun experiences. So they're not on their devices all the time. We have to create those things for them, those opportunities.
Okay, a lot of questions came in about anxiety. My 7-year-old is afraid of sleeping alone. She's worried about noises and monsters. How could I validate my child's feelings? They're having physical symptoms due to anxiety. Are there natural ways to help my child with anxiety? A couple of questions with this recurring theme. Anything you could add about anxiety specifically? Seems to be a lot more prevalent in children.
So if you just want damage control, take them for therapy, give them some homeopathic remedies that'll calm them down. But why? That's really the intriguing question. Where is all this anxiety coming from? Having a better relationship with your children is often misunderstood, and parents become childish. Wanting to have a relationship with their children, they become children. And they act childish with the child, thinking that will create a closeness, or it backfires. Children want their parents to be perfect. Today, it's very popular to let your children know as soon as possible that you're not perfect. Convincingly. I want to make sure you know I'm not perfect. What's the chokhmah? It makes you feel better. It doesn't make the kids feel better. They need to know that you are in control, that you know what you're doing, that following you is safe. But when you come across like a buffoon, they don't trust you anymore. And if they can't trust you, who do they trust? Nobody. That's anxiety. So parents who act like children, or just in general, have no confidence in their own parenting, are going to leave the children insecure and anxious. Parents used to have authority, so children listened and felt safe. Maybe they didn't like the authority, but they needed it, and they got it, and looking back at it, they loved it. Today, we don't give our kids security because we don't speak with authority. So one of the really helpful things to do is to quote your parents. When you say to your children, "Oh, my mother would never let me do that," that sounds like you know what you're saying. But if you say, "I hate when you do that," oh, you got problems? Don't show all your weaknesses to your children. They don't like it. They don't want it. Because then they start talking to you like you're the child. Then you get angry at them. Just snowballs. Why don't we have the confidence? We're making stuff up as we go along. We're treading water. Because we're not quoting our parents. And we're not quoting our teachers. It also disconnects children from their grandparents. So I think it's a very useful thing. When you want to tell your child that something is right, say it in the name of your father or in the name of your mother. Then you sound more confident. Children want you to be confident. If you change your mind every couple of weeks about what's important or what's not important, how can they trust you after that? So the Rebbe writes in Klolei HaChinuch VaHadracha, a good mashpia never changes his mind. Like one day he said, "Oh, what you just did is terrible." 2 weeks later, he finds it cute and endearing. Don't make the kid crazy. So before you lay down a rule, make sure you're going to stick to it for the next 10 years at least. In other words, sound confident.
Rabbi Schonbuch, any additional perspective?
I agree 100%. It says in Mishlei, "Ma'ane rach meishiv chema," a soft answer dispels anger. So, when you give a soft answer, it's the best way to do it. Number one, without a lot of emotion. And two, you have to make sure it's authentic and it comes from someplace. The kids see the authenticity and your calmness, and it registers. You can tell your kids what you want. That's okay. The liberalism of the last 40 years has failed. It didn't work to some degree. It's been some good stuff, but it failed. And it took away from parents the ability to bring history into their parenting, tradition. But when you deliver tradition with calmness, it's extremely convincing. It's extremely powerful. So I think that's what we're saying here. It has to do with your emotional delivery. It has to do with the fact, are you authentic? And where is your authenticity coming from? Where are you rooted? But
And that will help the kids be less anxious?
Yeah, yeah, it will. If we're less anxious in a calm way, it helps our kids be less anxious as well. But if that doesn't work, of course, if it's more significant, I recommend some CBT, as I talked about it, about half an hour ago. It works. It also can be very helpful.
Okay. One question asked, what if two parents are not on the same page with standards? How could you handle that? It's causing a lot of tension.
First of all, children should never know that their parents disagree. Then they become very tempted to use the parents against each other. It's a terrible thing to do. I heard from one very, very bright kid about a certain question. Can I go to the park? He said, I have to ask my father. He always lets. So you know already who to ask for what, because you know who's... When parents disagree on how to raise children, what exactly are they doing? What are they doing? Having a competition about who's right when you're dealing about your children's life? I mean, unless one of the parents is completely off and what they're suggesting is dangerous, work it out. Do it his way for a while. Do it her way for a while. What does this need to dig in your heels and insist that it has to be your way?
Well, there are a lot of different situations. It could be a hashkafic difference. It could be a
Yes.
personality difference.
Yeah.
It could be the
Anything.
parents are not even married. It could be that shared custody. There's a lot of scenarios where children would have different parents with different opinions. It's not always an ideal scenario.
Well, I'm not thinking about the children now. I'm thinking about the parents. What are
Yeah.
they doing? No, you can't raise children that way. Yeah, you can. Many people were raised that way. So again, unless the parent is suggesting a really dangerous behavior, like for the sake of the children, work it out. Come to an agreement, come to a compromise. What does this need to be right? It's suddenly not about the child anymore at all. Then it's just become an ego thing. So the wisdom of the parents, I mean, that's the maturity of the parents. That's absolutely essential. If the parents are not going to be mature about things, then what hope do the kids have? So it doesn't pay to fight over these things. Your husband was raised a certain way. He wants to raise his children that way. By saying, no, you can't raise your children that way, you're saying you were raised wrong. Well, then why'd you marry me? Obviously, I turned out okay. So if I turned out okay, what are you so worried about? No, I was raised differently. Good for you. Over this, you're going to destroy your kids?
You're saying it's more destructive, the disagreement, than any of the...
Yeah, a little more machmer, a little more makel. Really? This is what you're going to argue about? You're going to end up neither machmer nor makel. You're going to not going to have a kid at all. Look, parenting is not difficult, but it is definitely idealistic. If you're going to parent, you have to put aside your ego and your habits. You got to be there for the kid. That means you can't be stuck in your own shtick. I mean, you can't be stuck in your own shtick just to be married. So You know, there is no such thing as a good mother. And a mother who starts to measure, am I good? Am I a good mother? Am I a good mother? That's it. It's the beginning of the end. No, you're not a good mother. Just do your best. It's not a contest. Mothering is a great mitzvah. Are you doing it perfectly? I don't know. Do you daven perfectly? Do you learn Torah perfectly? Do you bench perfectly? Who thinks like that? So are you going to be a perfect father? No, you're not. You're not. Just don't stop being there for your kids. You make mistakes? So make mistakes. Just don't stop. The same with Yiddishkeit. Don't be a good Jew. Just don't stop being a Jew. That's all we need to do. And nobody is going to question you. Nobody's going to judge you on whether you're a good mother or not. Not even your children. Ask a group of healthy children. Was your mother a good mother? They never thought about that. Which means she was a good mother. If they have to think about it, or they had thought about it, and they measured and they judged, something's wrong. A good, healthy family, nobody thinks, oh, you're such a good mother. You're my mother. What else do you want? You want to be good at it too? Don't do that to yourself. Just mother. There's nothing better. Just be a Jew. Be a good Jew, a perfect Jew, a better Jew. No, don't do that. Keep it simple.
Rabbi Schonbuch, we're about to wrap up. Do you want to give the last few words?
Yeah, I was just saying, as a person that's a marriage and family therapist with experience with this, I would say you never fight in front of your kids. It's the worst thing you could possibly do. So whoever is leading at the moment in the living room, let them lead. Don't contradict them. You want to talk about it? As I mentioned before, Mani Rachmei Shivchema. Afterwards, in the bedroom, talk about it, but never chas v'shalom bring the machlokas out to the living room. Because if you want to weather the storm, that's a good way to conclude for tonight. Then you have to create safety, and the most important relationship of safety is the parents that they're there for them. So if they see machlokas between them, and I agree with Rabbi Friedman, you can't fight in front of their children. They have to just respect the other one then and talk about it afterwards if necessary.
I remember these kids saying to their parents, how come you never disagree with each other? And they both cracked up laughing because they disagreed on everything.
But they did it well. They did it well.
Not in front of the kids. Yeah.
When they weren't looking. Yeah.
Wow.
It's the environment which creates, it's the earth and the soil for the plant that allows it to grow. Think of yourself as the earth and the water. You're there for the plant to grow. You create that basis for it and they grow healthy. You don't have to outsmart them, do sophisticated psychological techniques. You just have to be real with them, be there, be calm, and then they grow. I bet you if you study parents that are doing what we're talking about, calm, collected, being there, spiritual, authentic, statistically, you'd probably see those kids do very well from those families, statistically.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi Friedman, Rabbi Schonbuch, all those who joined us, all those who are going to be watching the recording, and Hashem should give us hatzlacha with our ability to be that teva, to be that sense of safety for our children, for our families, weather the storms, and really that Mashiach should come, the end of storms. We should, have the ultimate good. Thank you so
That's
much.
the optimism.
The optimism.
That's the optimism that Rabbi Schonbuch was talking about.
Good.
Your children are better than you. Don't ruin it.
Don't ruin that.
Love it. Love it. Thank you. Thank you so much for all the advice and ideas. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Good night.